Well, greetings, Imagination Connoissuers and members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. Once again, it is I, and I mean, once again, it is I, your Viceroy of Verisimilitude, your Master of Fun and Wonder, your existential Mr. Rogers, Robert Meyer Burnett, here with another episode of Robservations, the show about something, coming at you from this, the Robservatory, which apparently must be the target of some kind of nefarious activities from foreign bad actors who want to prevent me from coming on the air and talking to you. But somehow I made it back. You followed me here. I want to thank you for that. We are going to have a good time today. Now, if I might start again, and for those of you who know me, you've heard me say this already, but as many of you know, many of you might have heard the news that dropped today that yes, indeed, Collider, the network that I began my YouTube career on, that I was on starting in April of 2015 into 2018, I was on for about close to 3.5 years, is basically changing over their format. They're going to get rid of their daily shows, their chat shows, everything that built that network in favor of more scripted and unscripted content and shows like Comic Book Shopping, which I've never understood why it wasn't called John Schnepp's Comic Book Shopping to honor him. But a lot of my friends are out of work today, and I have to say that my time at Collider, as I was explaining to other people, it was a great time. I really enjoyed working with everybody at Collider. I'm still working with a number of people that I work with at Collider, people like Coy and of course Roxy. I'm working with them on the Schmodown, and everybody at Collider was incredibly nice, and I met Christian Harloff there and Mark Ellis there, and I'm glad to be friends with a lot of those people and participating in still Schmodown events. I'll see all of you in New York City. If you guys didn't know, I'm going to be in New York City, I think on Saturday the 25th for a live Schmodown event. I was thinking about having a Robservations meetup while I was in New York City. If anybody is interested in doing that when I'm there, I will be happy to. We should organize that. We should have a meetup, a Robservations meetup in New York City at the end of January. So if you're interested, hit me up. But everybody at Collider, my heart goes out to you all, and I know that Comic Book Shopping's sticking around, and they're betting their future on their deep fake George Lucas show, it is funny. I just don't know how long these things can last. But, as to everyone, my heart goes out to you all. Now, this if you haven't heard, on Reddit, it started on Reddit. I was sent the Reddit story, and it's a long story. Now, I am not going to go through and read everything on this Reddit posting. As everyone knows, or people that follow the internet, if you follow Fandom Menace channels, if you follow my channel, and there's a lot of other YouTubers, there's a lot of talk about all of the leaks, the Rise of Skywalker leaks that have happened. Most of them happened on Reddit. And I was sent this yesterday and asked to comment on it. I'm putting it in the live chat. It is a very interesting Reddit thread about J.J. Abrams' battles with Disney over his edit of The Rise of Skywalker. Now, obviously, when you read this, it sounds pretty contentious to me. And I've been asked, do I believe this? Could it have been a better movie? Look, I have said from the get-go, and by the way, for the record, yes, I tend to believe everything that was in this Reddit posting. It makes a lot of sense. When you hear rumors and things, when you live in Los Angeles, there is what I would like to call, and I didn't make this up, I read it first in Andrew Vaux's Burke novels. But in the Burke novels of Andrew Vaux, the character of Burke has a sort of a group of people that work for him to help mostly children that are being somehow abused, and women, young women that are being abused. And he calls the whisper stream just that. There is a whisper stream that's constantly running that has rumor and innuendo and facts and fallacies and all kinds of BS, but the whisper stream sometimes, or a lot of the time, has information that's important you glean from that. Well, living in Los Angeles, there is absolutely a whisper stream in the entertainment business. Now, for someone like myself, I mean, I would say that I work, you know, I don't work at a studio. I used to. I don't work at a studio now. I'm an independent filmmaker, and I do follow science genre material, whether it's science fiction, fantasy, and horror. That's what I pay the most attention to, because I have friends that work on genre TV and genre movie projects. So there is a whisper stream. So a lot of the Reddit leaks that I've read about or read, I tend to think that there's a lot of it. You can sort of see when you work in the entertainment business what's real and what's not, just even the terminology. Well, it's not hard to imagine that working on The Rise of Skywalker had to have been one of the most pressure cooker. I can't even imagine a more of a pressure cooker working on a movie, because there was so much at stake with it. Not just wrapping up the prequel, or pardon me, the sequel trilogy, but also carrying the brand forward. And Star Wars, as I was explaining yesterday, Star Wars, I think, between The Mandalorian on the TV side, on the streaming side, and Jedi Fallen Order on the gaming side, which, make no mistake, do not forget how profitable video games can be. And when you have a great video game like Jedi Fallen Order, I mean, I've read incredible, as I was saying yesterday, Chris Stuckman, I watched his review of the game, and Jeremy Johns, and there's a lot of people that really love this game, people whose word I trust. And obviously, the last episode of The Mandalorian was a barn burner. Really love that. And The Rise of Skywalker is still doing very well at the box office. Whether it does as well as Last Jedi remains to be seen, although Scott Mendelson over at Forbes was declaring the movie almost dead. But there's a really interesting article that dropped on December 30th on Vanity Fair. Now, I thought this was really interesting. Why Harrison Ford returned to Star Wars one last time. And this is from the article. And the article was written by Anthony Bresnikan. I think I pronounced that right. How did director J.J. Abrams persuade Harrison Ford to make one last journey into the galaxy? Well, I called him and I said, we want to have a scene in the film between Kylo Ren and his father. Would you do it? And he said, this is J.J. Abrams talking, okay. Abrams told Vanity Fair, breaking into a low-key Ford impression, it's not more interesting. Actually, it's a little more interesting. Ford's complaint about Solo in Return of the Jedi was that he had no purpose after being rescued from Jabba's palace. This time, he wanted to know why it was so important to have the character appear again in the saga's final chapter. JJ goes on, he said, we had a meeting and talked about what it would be. Harrison, who is one of the great people ever and incredibly thoughtful about everything that he does, all he ever wants is to understand the utility of a character. What's my role? It was about sitting with him and explaining what our intention was. We talked about it for quite a while. I sent him the pages, he got it, and of course, as you can see, he was wonderful. It also brought back one of Han's most iconic lines. When his son struggles to say the words, I love you to him, Ford's character replies to the silence with, I know. That's the same thing he told Leia, the young man's mother, when she said those words to him in Empire Strikes Back, obviously. Now, what was really interesting about this is that Chris Terrio speaks about it, and Chris Terrio said for this article, screenwriter Chris Terrio emphasized that what the audience sees is in Ren's head, not a Force ghost. I thought that was pretty obvious, but here's the interesting part. Solo appears only after Leia uses the Force from across the galaxy to awaken the good side of her child, the Ben Solo who was extinguished before she fades away herself. At least for JJ and I, we thought that this finally was Ren, after the death of his mother, being able to really ask for forgiveness, to ask his father for forgiveness and make some kind of peace. Terrio said. He cannot go back and take back what he's done to his father, but as Han says, your mother's gone, but what she stood for and what she fought for, that's not gone. So he can still make amends in the future. Well, what's really interesting about that is the Reddit leaks address this. And as I have often said, Star Wars used to be overseen and it was really the vision of one man. Now, of course, people like Dave Filoni, who ran the Clone Wars so effectively, worked in the animation that Lucasfilm was creating. I've often said I've really liked the Clone Wars. That final, was it the 6th season? I can't wait to see the 7th season, but I thought the 6th season was great. I love the way it built the mythology, and of course, Rebels is a show that is now pretty beloved. And of course, it's become canonical in the live-action films as well, with the Ghost appearing both in Rise of Skywalker and in Rogue One. So, reading these latest Reddit leaks, I'm like, I completely believe in that. And it's really interesting, though, to me, that if it's to be believed, that Disney somehow was recutting the movie and took J.J. Abrams out of the edit bay. Now, this is not unheard of. It is not unheard of for a studio to go in and decide to change the film from the director's vision. So the premise is, according to these Reddit leaks and what everybody's now talking about, oh my God, is that Disney made some substantial changes. I mean, maybe not huge changes in terms of running time or structure, but the nips and tucks that they have apparently made severely changed the movie. Especially, of course, I found it very interesting if you notice that in The Rise of Skywalker, all of the voices of the Jedi that Kylo Ren hears and Rey hears at the end of the film are credited. Now, according to these leaks, this stuff was actually shot, and this was going to be live action footage that was going to be incorporated there, like the Army of the Dead in Lord of the Rings. We were going to see an army of Jedi Knights, of our old stalwart Jedis that we know, actually appear in the film, and that had been reported on. I believe that to be the case. That makes sense to me. I'm like, they probably really did that. And for whatever reason, again, this whole, as I've said before, you can't, there's a lot of animosity in the fan base that is being hurled at Kathleen Kennedy and hurled at Disney and hurled at J.J. Abrams. I have enough evidence in Star Trek Into Darkness, Super 8, Force Awakens, and Rise of Skywalker. And look, as everyone knows, Rinsler wrote a book about the Force Awakens, a making-of book that was going to be like his books he'd written on Revenge of the Sith, Star Wars, Empire, and Jedi. His coffee table books about Star Wars, Empire, and Jedi are definitive. They're must-reads. If you're a Star Wars fan, you should read them. But he had written the same kind of book on The Force Awakens, and that book was killed. The publication of that book was killed after it was written, and apparently he was forced to sign an NDA about that project. So apparently Disney, who is very draconian about protecting their assets and their films, did not want what was in that book available for the public to consume. Now, I understand, because they have their image to protect. And what people don't really get, I guess because I understood it more when I was being in the industry, when I understood that Disney bought Star Wars, Disney wasn't just buying the Star Wars franchise to put it out. They were also buying it to incorporate it into the Disney brand. So Star Wars, which had really been the purview and the vision of one man with his collaborators, but it really was George Lucas. Star Wars Empire Jedi, Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith, all of those were overseen by George Lucas. One guy, one man. So when Disney takes ownership of anything, especially taking the ownership of something that really belonged to one person, it's going to change. The whole reason for Disney, it's no longer about one person's vision. And look, George Lucas was also very commercially minded, just like Disney is. But it was still his to do with what he wanted. But when Disney takes it over, There are so many different concerns, not just Bob Iger's concern or Alan Horn's concern in terms of movies, but suddenly the Star Wars brand over every single facet. Disney is a marketing juggernaut. Disney has an amusement park empire across the planet Earth. Star Wars is incorporated into all of those things. So suddenly the Star Wars universe must be in service to Disney itself and to the Disney in a way is kind of like Spectre in the Bond movies, like an octopus, with tentacles reaching around the globe. And I kind of understood this. So I understood that the movies that we were going to be getting were going to have different areas of emphasis. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't necessarily. I don't know if there would be more Star Wars without. Maybe we'd be getting more Clone Wars or more animated shows. I don't know if we ever would have had more Star Wars movies with Lucasfilm. I think the only way we would have got them was with Disney. But because then, make no mistake, Kathleen Kennedy is beholden to Disney. The directors are beholden to Kathleen Kennedy and Disney. So Star Wars was now no longer one man's vision. It was presided over by an empire of corporate interest. Now, I understand that. Now, what's interesting I think the interesting lesson about the prequel trilogy is that the very thing that made Star Wars attractive to Disney, its unique take that comes from one man, is the antithesis of what corporate interests are. A corporation has to worry bottom line about profit and how to continue those profits. And when you spend $4 billion for a property, look, you're hoping to get a much larger return than $4 billion. You're looking to get tens of billions over the course of many, many years. So that's what they were looking for. So from a corporate standpoint, their first mandate was, of course, we need to introduce all new characters. Now, the problem with corporate interests is they, by definition, don't understand what made Star Wars attractive in the first place, that people love it, that it's been around for 42 years, now 43 years. 2020 marks the 43rd year of existence of the Star Wars franchise. But what Disney wants out of that suddenly is the things that people loved about Star Wars are not quantifiable on a spreadsheet. You can talk about them as if you know what they are. You can talk about business integration or impressions or whatever the hell you want. Whatever kind of marketing speak that you want to turn it into, you can do that. But that doesn't help you understand, why do people love Star Wars? Why do they love it? And how does a corporation, when a corporation's deciding, okay, what are we going to do with this franchise? They don't know how to get to how people love it. And the reason that people loved it is because you have an author in George Lucas and his collaborators that understands the story that they want to tell. A corporation doesn't understand a story. A corporation can't, by definition, understand a story, because what does that have to do? They have to sell a story, but they don't know how to make a story. And so Disney Star Wars, until you have people like Jon Favreau, who came on and created The Mandalorian. The Mandalorian was the Star Wars franchise seen through his eyes. He, of course, was smart enough, Kathleen Kennedy, remember, was smart enough to suggest Jon Favreau team up with Dave Filoni. And she put them together. Dave Filoni brought his sensibility that he had working on things like the Clone Wars or Rebels. So he understood how all of that worked. And together, collaborating, Jon Favreau sought out new directors in Bryce Dallas Howard and Taika Waititi, whose star is certainly on the rise. He's got a movie probably in Oscar contention this year. So basically, with Kathleen Kennedy's blessing, remember, it was her idea. So, it was her idea to put Favreau and Filoni together. It was Favreau's idea to do The Mandalorian, I guess. I understand from what I've read. So, it's very interesting that we're in this position. The problem is, again, When you read this Reddit article and you hear about everything that was happening behind the scenes, Disney, everyone's making decisions based on their corporate interests instead of really thinking about, listen, when you're creating Star Wars, your first responsibility is to your audience. Now, I know that's antithetical to the way a corporation thinks because their first responsibility is to their shareholders. I understand that. But when you're dealing with an IP that requires creative people to band together to make that IP, you have to understand as a corporation that what you are buying into is you are buying into the collision of art and commerce. And you can never allow commerce to ride roughshod over art. You cannot. You will never win. And you will never, ever, 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 ever win. So what's interesting is smart people, smart corporate overseers, overlords, whatever, hire creatives that they can trust and get out of the way of those creatives. I know. When you've got hundreds of millions of dollars riding on that, it's easy for me to say that on the internet. It's a whole different thing when you're presiding over that money and your corporate shareholders are expecting a return on their investment. It's a whole different ball game, whole different ball of wax. So I completely understand what was happening. Now, I am not a fan, as I've said, of J.J. Abrams' work, but I absolutely respect what he has done with his own career in the industry, what Bad Robot has done, all the people that they employ. J.J. Abrams is a well-liked person in the industry, and I'm sure we would get along famously until I had one too many drinks and told him that I think 5 of his movies, well, for me, didn't work. Maybe I would be able to hold my tongue and say that. But I certainly respect what they've done. I certainly respect the way that they were able to develop a global audience. I fundamentally reject his TED Talk mystery box storytelling. I think that's an excuse, and I think he's leaned into that. And you can watch many YouTube videos that will dissect. I want to say written by, or the guy who did the essay, something like written by, it's something like that. There's a great piece that he did on the writing and the Rise of Skywalker that I particularly agree with. But at the end of the day, it's unfortunate reading these Reddit leaks about the kind of movie that J.J. Abrams wanted to make, and the fact that more is coming out about the interference in The Force Awakens. And I get it. I understand that Disney, making these movies are fraught with peril. I know that there's a lot of people that are like hashtag release the Abrams cut already. Now, I don't know how true all of this is. Making movies, again, you cut things, you don't cut things. I would really like to hear why not release a director's cut? Why not do that? If there's a longer version of Rise of Skywalker to be had, how many extended versions of movies have we received over the last couple of years? Ridley Scott alone has been responsible for 100,000 of them. No, I'm just kidding. But if you think about it, there's a longer version of The Counselor that came out. There's a longer version of Kingdom of Heaven. There's there's different versions of Blade Runner, of Legend. Just a lot of his movies. And I think that, hey, if there's a longer version of Rise of Skywalker, if there's one movie when you release it on home entertainment or 4K or whatever, I'd love to see it if that cut exists. And I do believe there is a cut of the film that J.J. Abrams is far more content with than what was released. I do absolutely believe that. I don't know if everything that's reported in the Reddit leaks is correct, but I mean, we all have to understand what Disney is trying to do is protect their investment. Unfortunately, again, corporate interests and movie making do not mix. Do not mix. I think it was all very, very fascinating. Now, there's another article in addition to the Vanity Fair article. You know what? I think it's better when I read these articles that I do, in fact, drop them into the chat so you guys can find them if you want. Here is the article on from Vanity Fair, which you can check out. And I sent you the Reddit article, and you have that. You have the Reddit article in the chat. But there was also another Another article that I'm going to read, and this is from 4 hours ago, and this is from Zach Scharf, and it was on IndieWire. Now I'm going to read this because as a fellow editor, I want to support my editors. Anybody who's out there editing. So this article, the headline is, Rise of Skywalker editor opens up on rushed production and agrees that the film is fan service. Now, to me, all of these kinds of, an article like this, it's what it doesn't say that speaks volumes. But the fact that JJ's longtime collaborators, who now know they're all going to Warner Brothers to work because Bad Robot got that fat $500 million deal. So there's a lot, especially in the Reddit article, you'll read more about that. But this is, again, IndieWire 4 hours ago. Most critics agree that Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker is a disappointing finale to the 9-film Skywalker saga, and many have been wondering since the film's December 20th release whether or not it would have been stronger had the production been given more time to breathe. While appearing on the Rough Cut podcast via the playlist, Rise of Skywalker editor Marianne Brandon admitted the film's production was rushed, which made for a challenging editing process. Brandon is Rise of Skywalker director J.J. Abrams' longtime editor, having worked with him on the TV series Alias, plus Mission Impossible 3, Star Trek, and Star Wars The Force Awakens, among other projects. We were definitely still trying to figure out a lot of stuff, Brandon said about the sped-up process. It's a struggle. It affected everything. About a third of the way through, Lucasfilm president Kathy Kennedy was like, JJ has got to spend more time in the cutting room. And I knew that wasn't going to happen. Not with the schedule we were on. Not with what he was dealing with on a daily basis. He was exhausted at the end of the day. According to Brandon's estimates, the Rise of Skywalker crew had 3 months less to work on the latest Star Wars movie than was the case for The Force Awakens. Disney set a December 20th, 2019 release date for the movie that could not be moved, forcing Brandon to edit on set so that the production schedule was maintained. I suggested I cut on the set. We had 2 tented rooms, so I just went wherever JJ was, usually 10 feet away from the camera, wherever the camera was, Brandon said, and I just mobily cut. And in between takes, JJ could sit down with me and we could go over things. As for the negative critical reception of The Rise of Skywalker, Brandon said, in a time when the whole world is polarized, it should not be a film that is polarizing. Basically, the message of the film is, hey, you know what? You can be bad and good can come into your life. And maybe if you're open-minded to it, extraordinary things can change your mind. And you have to believe that there's always hope. One of the biggest complaints thrown at Rise of Skywalker is that the movie is pure fan service, which is not a claim Brandon will try and fight. Look, sure, it's fan service, the editor said, but if you didn't service the fans, it would be, oh, he didn't go along with the history of Star Wars and what it all means. I think that's telling. One, that she's even talking about this publicly, because she knows JJ's got her back. But, yeah. Very, very interesting. And of course, on Cinema Blend, there was an article written by Corey Chinchizola, and that also dropped 2 hours ago, right before I went on. Star Wars fans are campaigning to release the JJ cut after rumors of deleted scenes. And it's very funny because in Disney wanting to serve as fans, wanting to please everybody, trying to make the best movie possible, they have set up yet another years and years worth of fan vitriol and outrage. And it's interesting to me that that isn't understood, especially when it comes to Star Wars. Why they didn't schedule this movie to come out on May 25th, 2020, I don't know. Why not push it back? Why rush the making of a film that you have so much riding on? It doesn't make any sense. Have you learned nothing from Star Trek The Motion Picture, which was locked into its release date? Anyway, yeah, so there you go. That's just kind of what I wanted to talk about today. We'll see how it all shakes out. It's a news story after all, and there's all kinds of craziness happening. Now, as many of you know who are watching, over 2 hours into my stream yesterday, my sound just cut out, and I assume that my sound is here. I'm sure you can see me now. I'm keeping better tabs on it. I've rearranged my screen so I can see. We shall see. But anyway, a lot of you sent in super chats and I thank you for that. I'm going to read some of those that you sent yesterday. Let me get back to where they were. It was, let's see. Oh, here it was. So, Jashan Cater said, I just caught up with your selection of favorite films of the decade. What a lovely video, sir. Enjoyed all the trailers. Happy New Year, R&B. Well, Jashan, you know how much I love your name. I want to thank you for sending that in. I appreciate it. I don't know if I'll ever do a trailer video again. It was kind of more trouble than it was worth. It was a pain in the ass getting all those trailers, but it was fun. I liked doing it. But a lot of people, were iffy on it, but I really appreciated that you do. And then Jashan also returned and said, check your sound, sir, which I didn't do. See if I just checked the live chat. And then Karam Tariq said, Rob, there's no sound. Can you fix it? So, Mr. Tariq, thank you very much. Richard Green said the audio went down. And you guys are all sending me super chats, and of course, to tell me. So, God bless you. Willow said, not good with Willow said, not good with lip reading. What were you saying during the last 10 minutes of Robservations 306 when the mic went dead? It looked like a good rant. I don't know quite what it was. I don't remember. I just cut off the stream yesterday. I went in and edited it after it went up, and when the sound went out, I just cut out of it. So I apologize for those who might have tried to watch the entire stream and it went out. But you got over 2 hours of delicious Robservations goodness. So I hope that was enough. So I very much appreciate everybody who was trying. The Richard was contacting me via while the show was live. I'm like, brah, I can't. Little did I know. But I want to thank all of you for looking out for me. I want to thank you for that. Echo Base Network sent in a super chat. Still waiting on your recording so we can get you into the potential final cut to their documentary. Well, Echo Base Network is doing a documentary about the the sequel trilogy. A promo just dropped for it, so look out for Echo Base Network's film, and I'll be looking forward to seeing it. They've asked me to participate, and I'm going to make a video for them. Would like to have you on our live stream following the premiere on Saturday, January 11th, if you are free. Well, here's the thing about Saturday, January 11th. It is a big event, a live event that the Schmodown is doing, but I would love to if I can. I'll find more out later. Mark C. said, sadly, corporate interest over good storytelling is going to run this thing into the ground. Even Lucas knew, if mishandled, can kill this franchise. No, absolutely. Absolutely. I completely agree. Again, a corporation is not built to be the overseers of storytelling. They're supposed to hire the people that know how to tell the stories and let those people do their jobs. That's what great producers do. Great producers, people ask, what does a producer do? Well, the beginnings of being a great producer is to, 1, find great material that you love and believe in, and 2, you pull the team together. You create the team to realize the vision of what this great material can be. And look, producers can clash with their directors, obviously, because they obviously had the vision initially to get the project. But what you're supposed to do is get on the same page with people before you start shooting so everyone knows what is expected and what's going on. That's the collaborative movie-making process. Well, corporations don't know what that means. So it's bad. Garen Gillum says, RMB, tell us about aspect ratios. Why are some Blu-rays 16:9 and others widescreen? Same with TV shows today. Some are even something in between. Ooh, what a good question. It's tough. But, okay. How to begin? Basically, an aspect ratio, for those who don't know what an aspect ratio is how big the screen is that you're watching. The aspect ratio is how tall is it versus how wide it is. Now, when movies started out, they were basically square, rectangular, photographs, rectangular, that kind of a thing. That was the aspect ratio for movies. And television essentially, when television was created, was also square. Television had an aspect ratio of 4:3 or 1:33 to 1, meaning for every 1 unit tall it was 1:33 units wide. Not quite a perfect square, but close to a square. And that was the aspect ratio of the image that you were watching. So what happened was, as television seeped into and began to permeate, the world, Hollywood needed a way to compete with what they saw as the biggest threat to their livelihood. So they started to change the aspect ratio of movies. So movies started to get wider. There were many different widescreen processes. There was things like, of course, CinemaScope, and there was VistaVision. And basically what happened was that the images for movies went from being a square to getting wider and bigger. And that was to bring in, to keep movies larger than life. As more and more people bought televisions, movies began to get bigger. Now, televisions in the NTSC era, I mean, there were around the world, there were different broadcast formats. We had NTSC along with Japan, Asia, and in Europe they had PAL, they had CCAM, different aspect ratios. Well, not really different aspect ratios at first. They were the same aspect ratio, but their frame rates were different, basically. Electrical standards, frame rates, things like that. But when the DVD era, let me back it up. So what happened with movies, with widescreen movies, when they were put on tape or television, they were what were called, they underwent a process called panning and scanning. And what panning and scanning was when you have only a square and you're trying to put a widescreen movie on a square thing, and you only have this image. When they would transfer films, sometimes they would just transfer them straight across and it would be incomprehensible. But then they started to pan across the image. So if you had a widescreen image like this, you had what's called a Panavision image, say Panavision, which is basically 2:3:5 to 1. So for every 1 unit tall it's 1, 2, 2:3:5. So it's the wide rectangular image. Now, that widescreen aspect ratio is recognizable. Jaws was shot in that aspect ratio. Star Wars, Alien, Die Hard, Raiders of the Lost Ark. That's a widescreen image. Now, that was the most common of Hollywood movies that you saw in the 70s, 80s, 90s, even today, was 1:8:5. The aspect ratio is 1:8:5. That is Tallulah barking because she cannot get into the garage where I am right now because I shut the door on them. But so 1:8:5 is pretty standard for Hollywood movies. Larger event pictures, but were 2:3:5. But there were some directors that even with a low budget, John Carpenter used the widescreen image. His movie Assault on Precinct 13 was a widescreen movie. Halloween, The Fog, that's his preferred image to use. As he once said, I read in an interview, he's like, I love 2:3:5. That's movies, man. That's what John Carpenter said. So what ends up happening is when laser discs first came out in this country, well, not first came out, but laser discs really was the first format to embrace what is called letterboxing. And what letterboxing did was, since we still had our square TVs, it would take your widescreen image and it would shrink it down so the rectangle, the widescreen image, would fit inside the square of a TV. So you'd have your TV, and then the shrunk down image would be like this. Because that was the only way to show the 2:3:5 to 1 image on a TV screen. Well, now that we moved into our new era in the late 90s and early aughts, and now, they started to make widescreen televisions. And widescreen televisions, 16:9 sets, or 1:7:8 to 1. What was very strange was 1:8:5, which was the preferred movie aspect ratio for the most part. I mean, look, Kubrick shot in 1:6:6. There was many different aspect ratios. But for the sake of discussion, I could get into VistaVision. There's Toho scope. There's all different kinds of widescreen films. But basically, for the sake of this discussion, let's just talk about 1.85 and 2.35. So when they went to a widescreen aspect ratio, on a wider aspect ratio, when you got 16:9 televisions, suddenly you had much bigger TV that was basically a 1.85 movie would fit in that format. That was ideal. Of course, it still needed to be slightly letterbox because 1.85 was a little wider than 16:9. So you got a little bit. They would shrink it down a little bit to fit. But sometimes they didn't. They just you're looking at a 1.85 film at 1.78 to 1. I know this is a little technical, but what happened then, what was really cool, was they came up with what's called progressive video. For the most part, I'm so getting into the weeds technically, and I'm sorry about that. But when you were watching a TV signal, TV was running, normal TV, NTSC video, was running at 30 frames a second. But 30 frames a second was actually 60 video fields. So in 1 second, you were seeing these fields going zzz, 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 zzz. But when they came up with progressive video, like 24p video, there was no more progressive. There was no more interlaced. It was a progressive image. And that was something that came out with DVD. And suddenly you could watch a widescreen progressive image on NTSC video, which was pretty great. So, anyway, now what we have is widescreen, high definition TVs. Now we still, even though we have a 16:9 image, you still have to take a 2.35 to 1. Die Hard or Star Wars still needs to be shrunk down a little bit, not as much as it did for a TV, but for our widescreen TVs, you still have black bands on the top and bottom of the screen because they preserve the original aspect ratio, the way the movie was shot, and I think that's really important. For instance, Tango Shalom, the movie that I just finished, was finished in 4K. The proper aspect ratio for a widescreen 4K image, technical spec, is 4096 by 1716 pixels. So that's what a true widescreen 4K image is, and that's the official standard. But that's basically what I have to make sure. Did I do a good job of answering this question? Now, what's happening, what's really interesting, is that television shows are embracing these aspect ratios. If you look, Star Trek Discovery went to a widescreen aspect ratio because now everybody's used to seeing those. No one cares about the aspect ratio. And we've seen IMAX has a different aspect ratio. Christopher Nolan would switch aspect ratios in the middle of his movies. Really, the first movie I remember doing this was Douglas Trumbull's Brainstorm back in, was that 83? Because it went from 35 millimeter to 70 millimeter widescreen to create the Brainstorm machines, the look of it. But what's really cool is the fourth season of The Expanse goes between a 16:9 image when they're on Mars or on Earth. But when you get onto when you go to what is it? I forget the name, but Ilum, or when they go through the ring to that planet, it's all shot in the widescreen aspect ratio, which I thought was really cool. Now I don't even know if I did a good job of explaining that, but I've done better jobs in the past. But I hope you take that for what it's worth. I'm going to, since I've been talking a lot about aspect ratios, I've got some pretty dope letters to read, and I'm going to read them. So, this, I don't know if this is, I think, let's see, this letter comes from Thomas Berthold, I believe. Bartholdi? Bartholdi? I think. Bartholdi? Thomas Bartholdi. Let's go with that. It may be New Year's Day or after when this gets read. That's okay. I wish both you, Rob, and the community a very happy new year. Just everyone be safe out there. For me, staying home tonight with my wife is all I truly want. Staying and watching movies and television. I was thinking the other day when I was watching Star Trek, I feel this need to share what Star Trek means to me as a fan. I messaged you on Twitter the other day that it was my own stepfather who first got me into Star Trek. I remember that. Ever since then, I've been watching Star Trek with my family. To this day, I watch it with my wife. I watch it with my own mom and stepdad, as well as my younger brother and sister. I even watched it with my own father, who passed away 2 years ago. I was thinking of how much he loved Star Trek and watching it every night. He liked watching all of the Star Trek shows. Every night on television, they showed one of each episode of all of the Trek shows, like you could watch TOS, DS9, TNG, Voyager, and even Enterprise if you wanted, all in one night. We watched it together. What does this mean to me? Star Trek is more than just exploration of space and to boldly go where no man or no one has gone before. It's more than just the special effects, the space battles with the Borg, or the cool openings. It's more than even the lovable characters we have grown fond of over the many years. Star Trek is about family. The crew of every starship or space station becomes a family. We grow up with them like we do our own families. So Star Trek is about family. This is why on this New Year's Eve I watch Star Trek with family, mainly my wife. And I think back on those fond memories of growing up watching it with my own family all those many years ago. I will always cherish the memory of having such amazing fandom that I shared with my own father every night, that I got to share with my mother, my stepfather, my brother and sister. I will always love it because now I get to share that love with my own wife. Star Trek to me has always been about family, and it always will be. So I say this, I have been and always shall be your friend. Thomas, your friend. Well, Thomas, I am your friend, and I think after reading that letter, the entire Post-Geek Singularity community, all of you Imagination Connoissueurs, are part of your family now. What a great letter. Thank you for that. I've always felt that as well. I mean, again, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy are I certainly feel that they're family members of mine. No slight on my own actual family, but I do think that that's part of the appeal. That crew, the crew of the Enterprise, first and foremost, they were a family, and I think that was always an important aspect of Star Trek. Absolutely, 100%. So thank you for writing in. What a lovely letter. And your wife's a great lady. She's married a great man. Tell her I said that. This one comes from Dean Mikitich, the long time member of the Post-Geek Singularity community. Hi, Rob and the PGS. In my last letter, I talked about my youngest daughter asking me about my favorite film. While I was thinking of the answer to give her, I could not think of a single film from the last 10 to 15 years as a favorite. Now, that's not to say there's not been a single film I've enjoyed. There have been lots, but none of them I would say is a favorite film or is memorable. Really? This got me thinking, why is that? I can't think of a single film from 2005 onwards and say it's a favorite film. After thinking about it for a day, I have 3 reasons, which are linked. They are the use of CGI in film, the quality of writing, and a film's budget. With the cost of CGI coming down from the days of Jurassic Park and Terminator 2, the quality of writing has also come down. It seems the studios are more interested in giving us more spectacular visuals over story. That's not to say there are no well-written films that have come out in recent years, because there are. Marvel has done well with this with the MCU, but I find their earlier films better than their later ones. With the MCU's success, Disney is now happy to throw as much money Marvel wants to make a film. But I've also found low-budget films to be far better than the $100 million blockbuster budget films. But even of those, I can't think of any that has stayed with me. Of the $100 million blockbuster budget films, Avatar is a perfect example. It is almost pure CGI and stunning, especially with the use of 3D. To this day, it is still the best 3D film I've ever seen. Me too. But story-wise, it's not that great, and it's definitely not one of James Cameron's best films. Looking back at films before 2005, the writing was far better. CGI was so expensive, directors and the FX team had to be creative to tell the story they were trying to make, and the result was much better. I know the cost of making a film today is much more compared to the films made in the 70s and 80s and even the 90s, but that is due to inflation. If we were to take Blade Runner, whose budget in 1981 when in production was $30 million, adjusted for inflation, it would cost $84 million to make it today. That is, of course, using the same film technology of 1981. If it was made today with 81 technology, therefore not using any CG, it's still cheaper to make than most of the current blockbuster movies. While I believe CGI and large budgets have destroyed storytelling in films, it has improved the quality of TV shows we have been getting, with the exception of Star Trek Discovery. My man. Sorry, could not resist the dig. There are far more shows and at a better quality than 10 to 15 years ago. Totally agree with you. So with that in mind, it's time for the studios to turn around and go back to basics. After all, they are there to make money. With smaller budgets and well-written stories and forcing the production team to be creative in the way they make a film, the studios could make far bigger profits. Plus, if the film turns out to be a flop, the damage would not be as big as if it had been a high-budget film. Kind regards, Dean Mikitich. Well, Dean, I agree with you to a certain extent, but I also think that the thing about major studio releases, major studio movies, they have become bigger and bigger. They become bigger spectacles because the studio apparatus itself, much larger overhead, they have to make a lot more money. And I'll tell you, from my own perspective, a movie I produced 10 years ago, a low-budget horror film called The Hills Run Red. There was a division of Warner Brothers called Warner Premiere. And they did all the DC animation titles, the superhero animation titles. And they had started a program where they were going to make low-budget, genre-fair, horror, fantasy, sci-fi movies for around the $4 to $5 million range. And they were going to release them to the direct-to-video market. And at first, the first one of these under this program was Return to House on Haunted Hill. And that was a spin-off. It was a Dark Castle, Joel Silver Pictures, Dark Castle Entertainment. And our movie, that was a sequel to the House on Haunted Hill. And our movie, The Hills Run Red, was the second of their deal. And they were going to make 10 movies. And then it was decided after our movie came out, there was a film that was prepping that was going to get made called Cheerleaders in Trouble. Well, the studio just decided that even whatever their margin could be, say across all platforms, you could take a $4 million movie. They knew they're going to sell it through Walmart. They knew they're going to sell it to cable and all that. Maybe their profit would be on a $4 million spend. They could make $20 million, $30 million, maybe. Now, why bother doing that when we can make a $100 million movie that might make $500 million or $1 billion? So the program, after we did Hills Run Red, they pulled the plug on Cheerleaders in Trouble in mid pre-production, so it never was shot. And our movie was really the last movie that came out under this deal. But the thought was, for a studio, this kind of profit margin, is it worth our time? And this is to me, this is the whole problem of what's happened in Hollywood. If you can be making $4 million movies, if you're a studio like Warner Brothers and you have a studio lot and you have an apparatus, a production apparatus, and you have the distribution method in order to get that money back, why wouldn't you want to be making movies all the time, nurturing talent across the board? If you could, use these movies, they're going to make money. Even if they just break even, but they're going to make money. I never understood, why would you end this project? Now, there were other reasons. But studios want to make a lot more money. How do they justify? Well, look, if you have films that are getting base hits every time, sometimes they're singles, doubles, or triples. Sometimes you might hit a home run. But with these direct-to-video movies, and they were servicing a very direct and distinct marketplace. That marketplace also began to shift. So maybe they saw that shifting marketplace and they realized they might as well get out while the getting is good. But, I worked for Full Moon. Full Moon had an output deal with Paramount. My dream project, if somebody came to me, what I dream of is, if they came to me and said, Rob, we're going to allow you to make $3 $5 million a year, $5 million films a year, and we're Netflix and we're going to distribute them. I would make some of the best genre fare that you've ever seen. Because if you think about it, if you look at shows like the original Star Trek, you don't have to break the bank. Star Trek used visual effects very sparingly. I think you look at a show like The Expanse, I dare say I think The Expanse is one of the best produced science fiction shows, if not the best produced science fiction show in history. The way they're able to create their worlds, I mean, planet to planet, ship to ship. I mean, it's amazing what they are able to do. But I think the problem with movies is that studio filmmaking has to appeal to the widest common denominator across the planet. So any kind of on these large movies, they can't make movies so colloquial anymore. That's why comedies traditionally didn't travel as well across the world, like into Asia, for instance, because our comedic sensibilities are so different. So the studios were forced by the economics of globalization and the fact that they're putting movies out throughout the global marketplace, that they have to make these movies appeal to the widest common denominator, and they have to make them more simplistic. Unfortunately, that's the way of the world. That's the world that we're living in now. And I think, as you pointed out, as movies, filmmaking has become more of a global endeavor from a studio level, and more money is being spent, television is where all the great creative people, the writers, and the people that really wanted to tell nuanced, dramatic stories have moved and gone. And I think that's great, because what we're getting is something, we're getting more, we're in the biggest golden age of television that there ever was. And so while I lament the large budget, look, I lament the days where I could see a movie like Hunt for Red October, which was a literary adaptation. It had powerhouse characters. It had great special effects. But the spectacle of Hunt for Red October was all about the characters in the story. I mean, it was all, I told you to speak your mind, Jack, but Jesus. I mean, it's so many indelible lines, and that was what we went to the movies for. That movie's delicious. And you had John McTiernan, powerhouse director, even though Elizabeth, my girlfriend's like, why do you watch that movie all the time? It's so boring. I'm like, boring? But those were movies. Hunt for Red October would be made as an Amazon. It would have been probably, if Brian Fuller was doing the Jack Ryan show, he would reinvent every one of Tom Clancy's novels and take us through. I would love to see what Brian Fuller would do with Hunt for Red October. But that was, to me, what studio filmmaking was. And, they weren't trying to make $1 billion. And a movie like Hunt for Red October could be a respectable hit. You spend $65 million or something, or maybe more, and you could make $350, $400 million, maybe even $500 million worldwide. Big hit. Those days are over. It's unfortunate. But I understand, because, why do people love movies? The spectacle is fine. But when it comes right down to it, people love movies because of the characters and the stories that they're inhabiting. And those are not contingent upon the pyrotechnics of visual effects or literal explosions. We all have favorite movie scenes. Just pick your favorite movie. Whatever any of you out there watching right now, pick your favorite movie. I'll bet you're not sitting there thinking, wow, I loved it when this blew up. Or I love this car chase. You're thinking about these characters that you love, and you're thinking about a scene where they're talking to each other. You're thinking about some interaction, some character interaction that they had, and that's the first thing that comes to mind. That's what you love. And unfortunately, in the global world of spectacle movie making that the studios are now in the business of, that has been lost. However, we've gotten it on TV. And I don't think that we would have had Avengers Endgame. We certainly wouldn't have had it 20 years ago. And I dearly love the MCU. I really do. And one of the great things about the MCU is, yes, they're movies about superheroes, but, when people talk about their favorite scenes, they're talking about Falcon saying, on your left. Yeah, it's epic when the portals open up, but it's only epic because of the characters. And that's why people love those movies so much. Because they are a great combination of great characters. And yes, I know, there's superheroes. But as far as superhero movie goes, the MCU has done something unprecedented in Hollywood history. But yes, great letter. I know I've gone off on a tangent. But anyway, that was a great letter. Let's say, okay. So Dan V900 sends JJ's editor just said, hang on, let me just pull this open so I can see it more, because I have to say I'm old. I'm getting old and infirm. I told you, with one foot in the grave. Don't I always say that? And what is going? Everything else works. Everything works well, except my eyesight. So Dan V900 says, JJ editors just said this about the reasoning behind cutting out how Palpatine returned from the Huffington Post. There was so much information in the film and so many characters that we wanted to have an audience concentrate on. I think we felt we didn't want to clutter the film up with things you didn't need to know. She said it was off topic. Then Dan says, that's insane and shows a problem. It does. And again, I would say when it comes to Star Wars, you again need to know your stuff. One of the things that I think everybody that works on a film needs to understand is, what film are we making and who is our audience? You have to remember who your audience is. And yes, the answer is your audience is for everyone. But you're making a Star Wars movie first and foremost. Your audience wants to know. So I think that's what you have to take that into consideration. John Hiroshi sends in a super chat and says, on Godzilla King of the Monsters, what did you think of the Mothra design? I liked him. I liked Godzilla. I liked Rodan, Ghidorah. I liked all the designs. Look, people talk a lot about Fat Godzilla too. I mean, they had to. Were they my favorite designs? Maybe not necessarily, but I did like the Mothra design. I think I would have made it a little bit more colorful. I think that was okay. But I did like the monster designs in the movie. I did. Timbula the Spider Monkey sends a $10.47 super chat. I love these. I love getting super chats from you guys. Thank you for that. The conversion, I can now see the conversion. It's so funny. Good to see two of my favorite things on the shelf behind you. The 35th anniversary Akira box set and Chaikin's American flag. Will we get a look at the other comics and books on your shelves? For those of you who don't know what Tim is talking about, right back here, this was the 35th anniversary of Akira, and this box set is, let's see if I can, is incredible. So this is the original Akira manga, all of it. This is the 6th, but it's in hardcover. Now, the original Akira manga was never in color, so it's collected, and the whole story, it's massive. For those of you who've only seen the movie, I highly recommend reading this manga. The manga is incredible, and it'll blow you away. I mean, it's very, very different. And then it also came with this totally rad hardcover book called Akira Club. And this book is full of, like, here's the Laserdisc cover, for instance. It's full of artwork and designs. It's really amazing. Now, this won an award at the this set won an award at the San Diego Comic-Con for design. And this was an essential purchase. I mean, I'm a fiend for, I love hardcover books and I love hardcover graphic novels, and I just don't collect single issues anymore. So this was, when I saw this, I'm like, I pre-ordered this way in advance. So yes. And it's got metal seals. Now, as other people know, one of my very favorite comic series of all time is Howard Chaykin's American Flag. I love this comic series. It's one of the series that got me reading comics in the early 80s. It got me back into comics. This was a Dynamic Forces hardcover, and this was a long time coming. I wanted American Flag, and you know how, look at, it's Raoul the Cat. Howard Chaykin's one of my favorite comic artists and writers. He's become rather controversial as of late, but and Ken Brusinak's lettering. This is I don't know if you guys know American Flag, but Chaykin's art on this is spectacular. They only came out with the first 12 issues, which bums me out. I wish they came out with more. You know, every time I open this up, I'm like, I want to look at this some more. I think I'm going to have to do that. So I'll put this back after the show's over. But I'm glad that I love when people are noticing things on the shelf. I mean, I try and change it up and put things like I'm adding another shelf actually this way. There'll be another shelf. There's all these books that are going to go on the shelf right there. I'm slowly but surely building things around. I mean, yeah, I hope that to answer your question, I would like to show more of the shelves and what's in here. Like I said, when I get to 20,000 subscribers, you'll see the Hot Toys wall, which will be fun to see. So I'm glad you like Howard Chaykin's American Flag and you like Akira. But yeah, you know, it's funny. For those of you, there's a New York Times article on Martin Scorsese that was in this week's. I highly recommend reading it. It's a fantastic look back at, or actually, it's not even a look back. It's looking at where he's at right now as a filmmaker and an artist. And one of the things he talks about is as you get closer to the end of your life than the beginning of your life, it's all about giving your stuff away. So I was thinking about that, and I'm like, if I found out that I had, God forbid, a terminal disease or something, it would be fun to have a party, a day, where I could just call up everybody I know and say, okay, come in here and take what you want. And I think my only question would be, just tell me why you want this. Like, if you came in here, Tim, if you flew in from Australia and wanted to take my American Flag, I would know. Is that too morbid to talk about? I don't know. Zach Losel sent in a super chat. Shalom, Rob. I'll be in town for the Schmodown draft next weekend. Never been to L.A. Any must-visit recommends? Grauman's is on the list. L'chaim. Well, Zach, let me tell you, you've never been to L.A. Well, first of all, Hollywood's a shithole. It is. You'll walk around, there's homeless people everywhere. It's just a tourist trap. However, if you're going to go to Hollywood Boulevard, and I know everybody has to, you have to go see a movie at the Chinese Theater. And remember, there's the main auditorium, the IMAX auditorium, then there's the Chinese 6. You don't want to go to the Chinese 6. You want to go to the main auditorium, and you want to see something in IMAX, preferably in 3D. And if they're having a Rise of Skywalker showing, I know whether you liked it or not, go to the Chinese Theater and see it in 3D. They usually have like one 3D showing a day. But there's so many places that I would suggest visiting. I mean, I would go to the Griffith Park Observatory. I would go drive fast on Mulholland Drive at night. If you're not a good driver, don't do that. But there's so many places. I'd have to contact me. And if you're going to be at the draft, then come up and say hi, because I'm at the draft. I don't know. I just made a deal with Kaiser regarding my draft picks. Which you'll find out about later. I don't know if I can say that, but I can't say. I'm not going to say what it is. I made a deal with Kaiser. But yes, there's many places, but Hollywood Boulevard is not the place I would recommend to go. Beverly Hills is always fun to go see. Venice, again, another shithole, inundated with homeless people, but you still maybe got to go to Venice. I would go, if you can, drive up the coast, go see Santa Barbara, go to Zuma Beach, go to places like that, Manhattan Beach, play some volleyball. For about 8 years, I had a standing Saturday volleyball game. We played for 8 years. I miss that. I miss those days. So anyway, Martini McFly sent in a super chat. Getting dibs in now for the Tango Shalom Super Duper Special Directors VHS edition in pan and scan. That, my friend, will never happen. Tango Shalom is a beautiful, beautiful wide-screen image. You can't go wrong with that. It's funny. I could actually show a scene. I'd get in trouble though. Somebody would get pissed. I could play a scene from Tango Shalom right now in this live stream. Yeah, but I better not. I'm going to though. I'm cutting a trailer for Tango Shalom, and I'm going to crowd review it. I'm going to make a trailer for Tango Shalom, and I'm going to have all of you tell me whether or not you think this is a good trailer or not. It's going to be a special episode of of Robservations, where I go to you guys, and you guys are going to be my test audience and tell me whether or not you dig this trailer. How fun will that be? That's going to be pretty cool. It'll be a little horrifying too, but you never know. So I have a letter here. I have a letter coming in from Jason DeWolf. Happy New Year, Rob, and fellow Post-Geek Singularity members. I recently rewatched Gremlins during the holidays and was reminded how much I adore movies that were obviously shot on studio backlots, and the simple atmosphere lends itself to a skewed version of reality. These types of movies were most apparent in the 80s. The perfect example of a big-budget movie would be Back to the Future, and the lower-budget examples would be Return of the Living Dead, House, and The Burbs. I love the influence that the 50s and 60s had on these filmmakers and how they seemed to use them in a way to accentuate an alternate reality. The melding of these older influences, techniques, and sensibilities in the 80s made for some really fun stuff we will likely never see again. Did you enjoy the overt backlot vibes of movies back then, or were they not so overt and just easier to see from today's perspective? Well, Jason, that's a great question. No, I for all my talk about verisimilitude, I loved the backlot. Like, I worked at Warner Brothers for a little over 2 years. I was on the backlot every day. And what was interesting was to see, you'd be surprised, even things you didn't know. Lethal Weapon, for instance. Lethal Weapon there's the ranch that's down the street from the main Warner Brothers lot. It's down Hollywood Way. The Lethal Weapon house was on that lot. You know, they had some streets that if you were on the street, it looks like at the time, a modern suburban neighborhood. And yet you'd go like, oh my God, I recognize this from that movie. So much stuff used to be shot on the backlots. Almost all of it was. And I love that feel. I did. I mean, obviously Back to the Future, the clock tower, going back to the 50s. I thought shooting on the Universal backlot for that was a really interesting, fun thing to do. And it worked. And yeah, I mean, movies, that was how movies were made. That was how movies were made then. And as we've lost our backlots, we see less and less and less of that. But I did like that. And there was a feel that would be maintained throughout a movie. I mean, a lot of people don't know this, but if you watch the original Blade Runner, a lot of it was shot, that was all shot on the Warner Brothers backlot when they're out in the city streets of LA. A lot of that all on the Warner Brothers backlot, basically on 2 streets that were dressed to look like that. And when there's backlot shooting, you wouldn't even know. Like when I was at Warner Brothers, we made movies like My Blue Heaven or Defending Your Life. And these were films that were shot on the backlots of Universal or Warner Brothers. It was a great time, a heady time. And yeah, I mean, I like that. And now, you do see a lot of that. If you went in Los Angeles, there's LA Center Studios. I've had offices there. I've taught classes there. If you go down there, it's like where Mad Men was shot, where they had a lot of their sound stages, but there's a road in the back and the exterior of buildings, because they're like these mid-60s buildings, and you would not believe how much stuff is shot at LA Center Studios, how much you've seen of LA Center Studios, and it's I think it's a lot of fun. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I like the look of those films, and I think you're right. A backlot added to the feel of something like Gremlins, which I thought was I love Gremlins. Although I must say I'm a little disappointed with the 4K disc of it. Not to be down on them, but the 4K discs seem like they could have spent a little bit more time with it, but they didn't. Hello, Rob. This comes from Eduardo Barral. Hello, Rob. I've been a big fan of movies all my life, basically all kinds of movies, but I was always attracted to sci-fi movies. I love things like Blade Runner, the MCU movies. I thought Avatar was incredible, being immersed in this alien world by the 3D technology of James Cameron and what he used. And there are many more films I would mention. After watching your episode about some movies you liked best from the last decade, I started thinking about some of the movies that I find to be amazing and among the best made, yet are never mentioned or brought up. The fact that they are seldom brought up, if ever, has to do with, I think, the fact that they are foreign language films and therefore unknown to most. I myself have been exposed all my life to movies from different countries. I am from Spain and live in Santiago de Compostela. Santiago de Compostela in northwest Spain, close to the Atlantic Ocean. But as a kid, I lived in different European countries, and later on, I worked in some countries in Africa and Asia. So I have been exposed to different cultures and languages all my life, and I speak several languages because of these experiences. Perhaps this makes it easier for me to appreciate films that don't come out of Hollywood. I would like to bring to your attention some of those films that are never brought up. I have chosen to bring up 5, and I'm curious to see if you know any of them. I could bring up many more, but I don't want it to drag on. So here it goes. Oh, Suna no Onna, a.k.a. Woman in the Dunes. Oh, yes. This is a fantastic movie by Hiroshi Teshihara. It's difficult to explain this movie. It's basically about a guy who collects insects and falls in a hole in the sand walking in the dunes. He can't get out and meets a woman who lives there. It sounds weird, and it is, yet it is still one of the most enthralling movies ever. I love Woman in the Dunes, and I own the Blu-ray, Criterion. It's a great movie, and yes, everybody should see it. Every Imagination Connoisseur should see Woman in the Dunes. You know, it's funny. Now, your next movie, Dersu Uzala, if you guys haven't heard of Dersu Uzala, it's a Akira Kurosawa movie. Dersu Uzala is number 2. A Soviet movie directed by Akira Kurosawa. I think it's the only movie he did outside of Japan. A story about the Siberian wilderness and the friendship and the advent of industrialization. For me, perhaps Kurosawa's best film. I love Dersu Uzala. I had a Japanese Laserdisc of it, but it was not subtitled, if I remember correctly. But I had it because it was Kurosawa. But it's another great film, and you are correct. He did make it in Russia. Castaway on the Moon, a Korean film I made you aware of a couple of days ago. You looked the movie up, and it was described as a romantic comedy. That is a misleading description, although it is in a way it is. I haven't seen that yet, but because of what you mentioned, I will go see it. Rungshop, a.k.a. Bullhead. I don't know this movie. A Belgian movie about a cattle farmer on steroids. I'll watch that. Bullhead. All right. Visitor Q, a film by Takashi Miike. I have Visitor Q. I do not have it on Blu-ray. I have it on DVD. A filmmaker who made a few films that are really out there, like Ichi the Killer, also a movie I have on Blu-ray, and a Power Ranger spoof, Zebra Man. This movie, Visitor Q, has the weirdest and funniest necrophilia scene ever in a movie. Yes, it does. Miike's movies are crazy, and I'm a huge fan of his. But yes, Visitor Q, definitely an interesting movie. This is a great list, very diverse list. I like that. This is almost. It's interesting. Aside from the Belgian film, they're all Japanese and Korean. So 4 out of 5 are Japanese and Korean. It's interesting. Look, I've been a huge fan of world cinema. I grew up at the Seattle Film Festival, going every year. I had an annual pass, and from 1980 to 88, before I moved away and moved to LA, I would see the Seattle Film Festival would show over 200 movies during its runtime in May and June, and I would try and see all of them. And it was great. And I love movies from all over the world. I'll watch movies from anywhere. But these are great picks. And I like that you went classic, like Woman in the Dunes. You know, but as far as Kurosawa is concerned, he made some really diverse movies. Ikiru and High and Low, which is a cop thriller. You know, and I love movies. I'm a huge fan of Asian cinema. I have not just martial arts or fantasy, but those kinds of movies. For those of you who don't know it, I wonder if I can. You know what? I bet I can play this trailer. Let's see. I'm going to play it because it's since you brought it up. There's a Japanese movie called The World. Oh no! You know what? I can't play it. I'd have to download it and translate. I can't play it. But here, I'm going to send you to the link. Because why not? I'm going to put the link in the description, and you can. Yeah, you got to see this. Okay. Now, if you guys want to see, this movie is wacky, but it's awesome. And for some reason, not a lot of people know this, but it was released in the United States. It's called The World of Kaneko. And if you like Tarantino, I put the link to the trailer in the description. There's some good stuff there, so check that out. It's very good. Well, Eduardo, I want to thank you for writing in. I love when people tell me about what they like, especially when people are talking about world cinema that's not in everyone's direct wheelhouse. That was a great list. Igosa Osula. Igosa, what a cool name. Igosa? I know I'm butchering these names. Dear Rob, remember me, Igosa? I was the person who commented on your YouTube video about Martin Scorsese and Marvel movies. I want to thank you for giving a voice to people who value imagination. And because of that, you've got yourself a new imagination connoisseur. Well, Igosa, I hope I didn't butcher your name. Welcome. I'm a huge fan of films of all kinds, whether it's morality plays, my favorite genre. Ooh, I like that. Morality plays is your favorite genre. Westerns, science fiction, among others. For all my versatility, my focus remains consistent in that I want to make sure that great storytelling is the main thing in any genre and form that I consume for the better. Rob, considering that you adore the new Hollywood of the 1960s to early 80s, I want to talk to you about the importance of that time period in a civil, cordial, and compassionate fashion. Feel free to agree or disagree with me as we talk about the era to where we should defend without fighting. You know, what you're talking about is the 70s, of course. In the middle of that is one of the greatest eras of filmmaking of all time. When I came across a great documentary about the new Hollywood called Easy Riders, Raging Bulls, that was based on a book, by the way, watching it was great because I learned things about the new Hollywood that I never knew before. For example, I learned that directors like Francis Ford Coppola, Sam Peckinpah, along with Martin Scorsese, wanted to actually go against the grain by making cinema that was small budgeted but can still be successful in the box office by telling authentic stories that captured the trouble of life itself, which they did. Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, Mean Streets. I mean, Coppola made The Rain, people. I don't know what you could say about that, but absolutely. As I was watching that portion of the documentary, I realized that in some cases, and feel free to disagree, we do not really have filmmakers that go against the grain nowadays. I say that because it is almost as if studios are putting out only products rather than things that will last long for the sake of real storytelling. Don't get me wrong, Rob. Like I said before, great storytelling comes in all shapes and sizes. Whether it is art as well as blockbusters, we should always recognize great storytelling no matter what genre it is. We need The Godfather, as well as The Dark Knight, and we also need Gone with the Wind, along with Jaws. What I am saying is that we need balance if storytelling is going to last long, since great storytelling is unlimited and never boxed in. Plus, we need to stop forcing our opinions on movies on other people, because regardless, we're all different people, so of course we should embrace the fact that we all have different views as opposed to fighting each other due to those same views. Rob, when I was 15, the movie that started my love affair with film is Frank Capra's Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. You were a fine 15-year-old. It started it because I knew that film is not only entertainment, but it can change lives for the better, too. Also, it is my favorite film of all time as well, and it will always be remembered as the film that made me see film in a passionate way. Back to the new Hollywood. I feel as though we need new filmmakers that go against the grain like the new Hollywood did without being elitist or putting cinema fans against one another. Let us defend without fighting. We on the side of people who believe that storytelling comes in all shapes and sizes, while there are people who believe that storytelling only operates in art. We should still disagree that art is the only form of great storytelling, while understanding those who believe that it is the only form of great storytelling, since we are different. Thanks, Rob, for being a light, and I will always support you no matter what our differences are. Love, Igosa. Do we have differences? It sounds to me like you and I park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay, my friend. What a great letter. And by the way, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. What a great movie to make you fall in love with movies. I wholeheartedly support this letter. And man, I loved hearing from you. I love this. I love hearing, what are some of the movies? I know when people say, I get it. There's going to be a lot of people that say Star Wars or Die Hard or James Bond. I understand that. But for those of you imagination connoisseurs, are there people out there that have interesting movies? Like seeing a movie like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington at 15 and being affected by it. My friend Jennifer Epstein, who is now Jennifer Washburn, was going through a tough time in junior high school when her dad had a heart attack. And she wrote this incredible paper for a class we were in on All That Jazz. And I saw All That Jazz when I was 12 years old, and it is hugely influential. on my life and my desire. I think the thing that made me so interested in film editing was All That Jazz. I love that film dearly. It's one of my top 5 favorite films of all time. But, I saw that when I was 12, and it wasn't your typical 12-year-old fare. And thank God my parents took me to that movie, because that was how cool are my parents for taking me to see All That Jazz. I mean, I probably suggested it, but it was still cool that they took me. So that was cool. Cinefinity and Beyond says, you and Schnepp were a big reason why I loved Collider Heroes back in the day. To know that Heroes and Movie Talk are done today is sad. Onward and upward. Yeah, I think Collider could have done more to broaden its programming. I know a lot of people wanted to do that. But it's great, because a lot of people, as you said, it's very sad for me to see Heroes go away. I thought Amy and Coy did a really good job with it, and Roca. It was a different kind of a show. I mean, obviously, Schnepp and I were sort of the elder statesmen, but they kept it going, and I thought they did a really good job. And more importantly, they made it their own show. But I'm sorry to see it go away, because Collider Heroes was a big part of my life, and I was part of the Collider family for 3.5 years. So I wish everybody the best, and I'm happy to take all their audience. So if you like these chats, please subscribe. Please tell your friends, share them all, you know what I'm saying. But you know what? I think everybody, especially like people like Perry Nemiroff, who also has produced movies, and she's just a very, very smart cookie. So I would imagine that everybody is going to move onward and upward. I'm just sorry people lost their jobs and things like that today. We shall see. Zachary King says, Hola, Viceroy. FYI, The Hunt for Red October 4K Steelbook drops next month. Yo, son. I pre-ordered that shit. Come on! I had to get a Hunt for Red October 4K Steelbook? Are you kidding me? My God. Hell yeah. And I'm going to make Elizabeth watch it. I pre-ordered it from Best Buy. Until now, I think the only way you could get it on 4K is to get that Jack Ryan 5-pack. You are correct, as far as I understand. And that's from the UK. I think they released it here, too. And, I got to tell you, my favorite Jack Ryan movie is Hunt for October, but then I love Clear and Present Danger, and I love Sum of All Fears. Phil Alden Robinson directed that. Director of Field of Dreams. So, yeah. Yeah. I'm in. I'm going to get that. I pre-ordered it. Heck yeah. Zachary King also said, enjoyed your review of noteworthy movies the other day. I agree that A Most Violent Year was a hell of a movie that flew underneath the radar. Under the Skin creeped me out, filled with existential dread. Well, you know what? Let me see. I got to tell you, since I'm standing here and I can do this, because why not? Because I can. And I'm going to. So, and since you brought up Under the Skin, okay, so this is a funny thing. Now I'm going to take off my headphones when I do this. So, hold please. Let me put these back on. So, as many people know, Under the Skin, the Scarlett Johansson movie, was based on a book. It was based on a book by a guy named Michael Faber. Here's the book, Under the Skin. Now, for those who like various kinds of genre fiction that are offbeat and maybe not what you're used to, I highly, highly recommend The Crimson Petal and the White. This is a fantastic book. And they keep saying that they're going to make this into a movie, but they haven't yet. And then this science fiction book, which is one of my, I want to say it's one of my, I can't, when I read Faber's work, I can't stop thinking about it. But this is really interesting. The Book of, let me see. The Book of Strange New Things. It's basically, it has a religious leader going to an alien planet to talk to the native population. That's really all you need to know. But Faber's work is great, and it was really interesting when I read Under the Skin. I was thinking, man, I wonder if anybody would make this into a movie, and lo and behold, they did. They made it into a movie. So there you go. And I'm glad that you felt that way. I'm glad you dug that movie because it's so good. Now, also, A Most Violent Year. Since you brought that up too, I love it. I'm telling you, I should subtitle this show "A Show Full of Serendipity," because let me read you an article that I saw that dropped today, which I was shocked by because, I love A Most Violent Year, and it was one of my movies of the decade. But listen to this. This was on Dark Horizons today, and it came from the playlist. Actress Jessica Chastain has teased that filmmaker J.C. Chandor's 2014 crime drama, A Most Violent Year, may get a follow-up. Set in the early 80s, the original film starred Oscar Isaac as Abel Morales, the virtuous self-made owner of a small heating oil company who is stressed by the competitiveness in the trades. It's right, heating oil, I said garbage. Soon his principles are ground down by the continual compromises he makes. Jessica Chastain also starred as his wife. This week, a fan posted a clip on Twitter of Isaac and Chastain recently back together again, talking about the film in a Q&A and professing their mutual affection. The video was posted with the caption, "Comforting to know Jessica Chastain loves Oscar just as much as the rest of us." Chastain noticed and responded, tweeting, "I actually love him more. Shh. Guess who may be visiting these characters again soon?" Wow, so Jessica Chastain is teasing is that an even more violent year? I mean, I don't know what they would call it, but that's very, very exciting. So Zachary, I like that. You too, you and I park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay. Timbul is back. Timbul is Spider Monkey says, American flag and Akira might be hard to transport back to Australia in a suitcase. I'm sure I could pocket that Zardoz and rocking machine, though. I have a full-size rocking machine just right over there. I don't know if I put that. Somebody would probably report me to have something inappropriate. I don't know. Zach Losel said, I definitely will come say, "What's up, son?" That's what John Schnepp used to say to everybody. Thanks, Rob. Well, Zach, I look forward to seeing you in New York in 3 weeks. 2 weeks? 2.5 weeks? David Cabrera says, seeing Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger at age 9 made me fall in love with movies. I was mesmerized. I watch it once a year, even though it is not aged that well at all. Yeah, even I could tell at the time. Harryhausen was certainly on the downslope. It was not like the original Sinbad. Echo Base Network says, I don't know the story, but did you leave Collider or were you let go and why? I was not. It's a story that Collider, it was neither Collider's fault nor was it my fault. But it was sort of, I was caught in the crossfire of some fallout that happened in the wake of John Schnepp's passing. Now, from my perspective, I would say that I was on Collider, I was on Heroes because of John. So I don't know if there was really a place for me without John. But I was marginalized after his passing. But I wasn't fired. And what did you ask? Let go and why? And I wasn't. Something happened that wasn't Collider's fault. There was an outside party that was involved. And I basically was content to walk away because there was no reason for any drama, especially in the wake of what happened. That's why I stayed on the Schmodown, and I bear nobody at Collider any ill will at all. And I love my experience there. So that's all I can really say, because it wasn't Collider's fault and it wasn't my fault. Although I do think Collider should have stuck up for themselves more. I can say that. Cinema Sky Show says, my man, Don't Fuck with Cats is a wild ride. Okay. So for those of you who don't know, Don't Fuck with Cats is a 3-episode Netflix miniseries based on a true story of something that happened. And believe me, the less you know, the better. It's another one of these documentaries that Netflix, God, I love me a documentary series like this on Netflix. But basically, it begins with some normal citizens, normal people, who were horrified at a video of a mysterious person putting two kittens into a vacuform bag and sucking the life out of the bags, killing the kittens, and posting the video on the internet. They became obsessed with finding out who did this and bringing them to justice. And let me tell you, go in, it's 3 episodes, it's 3 hours of your time, watch the documentary, don't read anything about it. Just watch the documentary because it's great. And it is a wild ride indeed, Sky Cinema Show. A wild ride. Stubble McShave says, when you have guests, I'd love to see Bibiani on the show and hear you two talk about movies and movie critiquing. I think it would be good to have a movie critic talk about his job and answer some questions from the Post-Geek Singularity. William Bibiani, the Beast, William Bibiani, is somebody I met through the Schmodown, and he is a great film writer. He is incredibly knowledgeable. He has a broad base of knowledge, and I should have him here. It'd be fine to have him come here to the Robservatory and have him on the show. I think that would be a lot of fun. I should absolutely do that. That's a really good idea. I'll be seeing him obviously because of the Schmodown, so maybe I can ask him. But I think you're right. I think that's a really good idea, because heck, why not? I like Bibiani. He and his entrances and Shazam. His team beat my team. Because we lost to him, he destroyed the family. So maybe I shouldn't. No, I'm just kidding. I like Bibiani. I wouldn't. I bear him no ill will just because he's smart. I can't do that. I can't bear anybody ill will because they're smart. Let's see. This is an interesting... let's see. Interesting. No, I already read that. It is interesting. Well, Stubble, since you just wrote in, or you just sent me a super chat, why don't I read a letter? This letter comes from Stubble McShave, all the way from Sweden. Hi, Rob. I heard you read this letter from Mark Chure the other day, about his response to Willow's letter concerning Man of Steel. When you read his words and how he claimed to be a toxic fan, I realized he's not a toxic fan. He's a critical fan. As a fan, you should be critical of things you don't think are up to snuff. Since we're all individuals with our own sensibilities and opinions, there will be a difference on what we're critical about. I share some of Mark's criticisms, but not all of them. A toxic fan is someone who intentionally looks at every piece of information through a negative lens. I think that some of toxic fandom that's found online is manufactured by reinforced views on a given property. It can sometimes become something of a cult following in the same way that something can be fawned over and worshipped in an unrealistic way. The most important thing is how we express our thoughts on a given subject, and that we have a civilized discourse when we express our differing views. You, of course, already know that since I've already named you the Duke of Divine Discourse. I gotta keep using that. There's so many to keep track of, but the thing is, when I can't call myself divine. By the way, I was very intrigued. What is it? Rona Mitra and Meyer Burnett have a new series that dropped on Netflix called Messiah. And of course, it's causing some uproar in the Islamic world. In Jordan, people are pissed because they shot it in Jordan. And, I got to tell you, I understand, but this whole thing, I just don't think that if the Prophet Muhammad was here today, I think he would probably go on TV and talk. I think we'd hear from him. And I don't know, I'd be curious that if that were to happen, would that violate the hadiths or the Quran or something? I don't know. I find this curious. But this Netflix show called Messiah is pretty intriguing. I love me some shows about religion, and modern religious leaders. It's like science fiction, fantasy, and horror. I do like shows about prophets. That's why I love biblical epics. Things like that. But it was intriguing. The first episode was intriguing. And Michelle Monaghan, who coming over from The Path, which was another religious show that I was kind of obsessed by, and I'm sorry we saw it leave after the third season. It's kind of a bummer. But Stubble, the Duke of Divine Discourse, I think I'm going to have to think about that if I can be that way. I don't know. Can I be the Duke of Divine Discourse forever? I'm uncomfortable with the word divine. Bette Midler could be the Divine Miss M, but can I really be divine? Dallas Lemons is here. Hello, Viceroy. I'm a new subscriber, and I've been thoroughly enjoying binging the last year's worth of content. Oh my God. I don't think we agree on everything, but I greatly appreciate your openness and honesty. Your industry knowledge is very helpful in contextualizing why certain decisions are made in films, which is why I'm writing you today. I don't understand what the general audience term means exactly. Sure, moviegoers who show up for marquee titles like Star Wars and Avengers might be considered the general audience, but what does appealing to the general audience actually mean? It's been said numerous times in the case of Star Wars that the new trilogy was made to embrace the general audience and bring new fans into the fold. The hardcore fans will just show up anyway, and I certainly did. You've stated that a lack of story direction across the new Star Wars trilogy was apparent, and I completely agree with this. This, in my opinion, hurt a lot of the hardcore fandom who were presumed to just show up anyway. Again, we did, and we will. I've spoken to many people who thoroughly enjoyed the new trilogy. The presence of the Force, lightsabers, explosions, good guys, bad guys, and space seemed to be enough for the general audience. That's a passive oversimplification for sure, but I deem it accurate for argument's sake. However, for hardcore fans, the lack of story direction and the blatant disregard of existing, beloved lore was a bit of a gut punch. I feel like The Lord of the Rings struck this balance of the Force. It was true within the filmable reason to the source material, and general audiences and Lord of the Rings fans embraced it largely. I wasn't a Lord of the Rings book reader, but I was first introduced to it by the films, but have since read and enjoyed the books. I view the following as a far-fetched and thin analogy. But go with me on this one. All right, people, here it comes. If Fellowship of the Ring was the prequel trilogy of Star Wars, and Two Towers was the original Star Wars trilogy, for example, let's say Return of the King is the new Star Wars trilogy, the sequel trilogy. Imagine Peter Jackson decided that the novel of Return of the King was not canon. Envision a movie where Frodo becomes king, where Aragorn dies in battle, Gandalf decides to sit it out because he's disinterested, Gollum went to Wizard Academy, and cats and dogs were living together. People, fans of the lore, would be livid, because we know what happened in the book. It also would be disjointing to non-readers since the story trajectory set forth in Fellowship of Two Towers wasn't carried forward. Likewise, we know what happened to Luke Skywalker after Return of the Jedi. We know what happened to Han and Leia's family. We know those details and stories. We were simply told those stories don't matter anymore. This is a new story. Can you make sense of this as it relates to Star Wars? From a corporate perspective, why would you push so hard for a story totally disconnected from existing lore? If they had appealed to hardcore fans of Star Wars, I would think it would include the elements that attract the general audience automatically. Can you shed some light and insight into this and why that balance has been difficult for the new trilogy to achieve? Why wouldn't the general audience turn out for a movie based on lore? Thank you for the great content, and I'm looking forward to the next year of Season 2. Dallas. Well, first of all, Dallas, welcome to the Post-Geek Singularity community. Welcome to the status. You're an official Imagination Connoisseur. This, my friend, this is a great letter. I love this letter. First of all, let's address the idea of the general movie-going audience. I think that when it comes to franchise properties, even though I've said it before, I think it's wrong-headed. It's wrong-headed to think that, fans are going to turn out anyway. What we're going for is the general audience. Fans and the general audience are exactly the same. The general audience, there was no fans of Star Wars when Star Wars first came out. There was only the general audience. And you know what? The general audience were turned into Star Wars fans by Star Wars. They didn't exist because there was no Star Wars. Then they became fans of it. So this idea that the fans, now we have a fan culture. Unbeknownst to the Mary Sue, apparently, this fan culture has been around for many, 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 many years. It has taken different forms. It is morphed. It is mutated. But because of the rise of social media, fandom has a voice more so now than ever before. And also, according to the Mary Sue, they don't realize that Ron Moore was on chat boards talking Star Trek back in the early 90s because they weren't born yet. I understand. But there is a thing called history that's important. That's just an aside. But I think that the general audience is the audience you should always be going for. And the general audience and the fan audience are both the same because what they want are great stories with great characters that are well told. So to me, the idea of, here's the thing. When we saw Star Wars, we didn't know what Jedi Knights were. We didn't know what the Clone Wars was. We didn't understand any of that. We were told about that in Star Wars, and we saw evidence of that. We didn't understand what a lightsaber was. It was just a weapon from a more civilized time. We didn't know, and yet we go with this. Now, if you saw Star Wars, you would wonder, what are the Clone Wars? What was a more civilized time? What really went on here? What was Princess Leia a princess of? Did Alderaan have a princess? No one really knew, but people embraced the movie anyway. Now, this idea that somehow, the non-fans are Luddites, that you don't have to give them a great story well told, is it's maddening. It's maddening. These are excuses that people make for not doing their own work. That's what I can't stand about Star Trek. And I agree with you. What Dallas was referring to when he talks about the lore, the stories that we know, if you were a Star Wars fan, and I mean a fan, you had to be a Star Wars fan, and you were reading the comics, you were reading the novels, you were watching things like the Clone Wars, things that hadn't, and Rebels, of course, later. But from the 90s up through when the prequels were made, and then even after the prequels, there was so much new lore that was being put out by Lucasfilm that we understood about the Solo twins. We understood about Luke and Mara Jade, and all of these stories were told across many different platforms. So those stories were out there, and if you were a fan, they were good. Some were better than others, but this lore was great lore. A lot of it was a lot really effective, and it was terrific. And it had been around for decades. So when Disney decides, if you were to go to Bob Iger would say, yeah, there's 6 Star Wars movies. That's what he knows. If you tried to explain to him, like, well, when they first released Dark Empire, the comics from Dark Horse, and the Thrawn trilogy back in the early 90s, he would look at you and be like, wait, what? He doesn't know. In his mind, those are just, and it was explained to me by Diane Duane, one of my favorite Star Trek writers. I've said the same thing about Star Trek. Why doesn't anyone go look at any of the hundreds of great Star Trek novels that are out there? I could give you 50 that should be adapted both as series and movies. They're already written. No one thinks about that. Those are looked upon as lesser items. They might as well not exist. And according to Lucasfilm, they decided they don't exist, and it's problematic. And I think it's a bummer because we as fans have lived with these stories for a long time. Now, your point is well taken. Why wouldn't the general audience be interested in this lore? Oh, they would have. Because if you were to go back and use that lore, it would have made for great stories and great characters that probably could have been well told. But the people that buy this stuff, especially when it comes to, and I've talked with my friend Dave Hargrove about this ad infinitum. It's like, I think I'm using ad infinitum wrong when I say it that way. But the idea that you can't look at this stuff, why don't they hire people? Like, I was hired as a Star Trek fan to be a consultant for Star Trek for Viacom licensing. I looked at comics, I looked at video games. Now, at the time, Star Trek was already being made. They didn't need me to tell them what I thought of the Berman era Trek that was happening in the mid 90s, but they hired me to do that. And I was given my first job. I was given a game, a Voyager game that was made by Viacom Interactive, and my job was to write. They hated the game, but they couldn't because it was an internal company. They needed an outside contractor to say it was a bad game, that it was bad Star Trek. And I think that's why I was hired. And I consulted on a lot of things, and I was really excited. I was a lot more excited than I think the licensing department was about this stuff, because I could talk about the novels, I could talk about the models, I could talk about the action figures, the Playmates line. Half the time they used to let me in this room where it was just full of Playmates toys. I'm like, this is the greatest job ever. I get paid and they give me free shit. I remember getting when Playmates put out their Voyager ship that had the nacelles that went up and down and made. I got that from that closet. The data, the red data from Redemption Part 2 when he was in the command uniform. I got one of those. That was a rare Playmates figure. I gave it to my friend Steve Melching, I think, for his birthday. He still has it. What a great job that was. I don't understand. I mean, they talk about the story group. Look, I get it. But, I don't care if the story group is comprised entirely of females, males. I don't care who is making up the story group. But I guarantee you, those people did not get their jobs because they said they were diehard Star Wars fans. They got their jobs because they probably had an Ivy League education or something. But I am with you 100%. I think anyone who's a steward of these properties, whether it's Alien, and I keep going back, I've said this a million times, you're going to be bored of hearing this if you've gone back into the last year. Look at what Ryan Coogler did with Creed. Ryan Coogler, huge Rocky fan. He conceived Creed to work within the Rocky mythos, and he gives Sylvester Stallone another Academy Award nominated performance as Rocky Balboa 4 decades, 70s, 80s, 90s, and the aughts. Actually, we're even almost 5 decades away. 4 decades, though, out from the original Rocky. And look what somebody who is a fan of this, who also is a world-class filmmaker, was able to do. That's what the studios should be looking for. The problem is they're not looking for the Ryan Cooglers, a guy who made one really accomplished independent film in Fruitville Station, who comes in with this idea to make a Rocky movie and knocks Creed out of the park. Great collaborators too, obviously. But they're finding a big filmmaker who doesn't like Star Wars. And I know J.J. Abrams loves Star Wars, and he made Star Trek, so, they pick the guy, and then they don't let him do his job. But I do think that they need to pay more attention, because I think part of the problem is, I understand what they're trying to do, and I don't think you should allow fans, fans should not be allowed to ever dictate the stories that are being told. However, fans should be the beacon that lead you down the proper highway to understand what stories you should be telling. That's what fans can do for you. And I think it's a very different thing. Fans lead the way. But they shouldn't tell you what to do, because, by the way, fans are not always the best judge of character or the best judge of stories. But you can get an indication of what fans are looking for. And let's face it, the people that were touched by Star Wars, that became Star Wars fans, like Jenny Nicholson. I mean, I watch her video. Poor Jenny. She was let down by the ride. If you're letting down Jenny Nicholson, come on, man. You're doing something wrong. You don't let down Jenny Nicholson. You just don't. And they did. I don't know. Lowell Brown says, Rob would like to know your favorite Planet of the Apes and Bond movies. Mine are Conquest and a tie between Man with the Golden Gun and Thunderball. Thank you and keep up the great work. Well, Lowell, very interesting. Let's see. I have to say, I would not put Man with the Golden Gun in my top tier or middle tier of Bond films. So it's interesting that you do, and that's a good thing. However, he has a powerful weapon. He charges $1 million a shot. An assassin that's second to none. The man with the golden gun. Another shot means another poor victim has come to a glittering end. For a prize he'll erase anyone. The man with the golden gun. Watch, I just got a copyright strike. Demonetized. but that was probably for the singing. Anyway, so my favorite Bond films, I got to go with Goldfinger, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, Spy Who Loved Me, Casino Royale, GoldenEye. Those are some of my favorites. But then again, I think From Russia with Love is probably the purest distillation of Ian Fleming's. As Ian Fleming saw James Bond, I think Man with the Golden Gun is the best example of that in motion pictures. My favorite Planet of the Apes movie has to be the first Planet of the Apes movie. The original Franklin Shatner Planet of the Apes film. I've told this story, but I'm going to tell it again because why not, you asked. So when I was a kid, I was a science fiction movie fanatic, and I loved movies about aliens and spaceships, and I would watch anything. I loved the astronauts. The Apollo missions were still going on when I was really little, and I remember them, and I remember Skylab. And in 1975, when I was 8, the fact during the period of détente between the Soviet Union and the Americans, we had the link up between the Apollo and the Soyuz capsules, which, by the way, they're still flying, and to the International Space Station. They still got Soyuz capsules going up. But I even built a model of the Apollo-Soyuz mission link-up that my grandfather had in his house until he died, so he had it for, 45 years or something. So that was pretty cool. But I remember the first time I saw Planet of the Apes changed my life. The original Planet of the Apes, so it was one of these things where, I don't know why, my bedtime was like 9 o'clock, because I was like 6, 7 or something, and I was flipping channels. I always did, like when I was a kid, if at night, if nothing, there was never anything on when I was a little kid that was interesting, and after Star Trek was over at 7 o'clock, I was pretty much done with TV. So I'm flipping channels once, and I come across Charlton Heston sitting in the cockpit of the Icarus. I leave the 20th century behind with no regrets. Does man still make war against his brother? All of that. Boundless. Squashes a man's ego. He's doing his little captain's log, right? So he's doing his captain's log, and then he goes to sleep. He goes into a sleep chamber, and the Jerry Goldsmith's music kicks on, and the lights are flashing. And it looked to me, because what I didn't understand the difference of movie credits. I figured the credits started to roll like this, and I thought it was the end of the movie. And they crash, the scene in Lake Powell when the Icarus capsule crashes and one of the crew members is lost. It's cracked and she's like skeletal, and they get out and they start walking through the Forbidden Zone. And I realize like I'm 5 minutes, 10 minutes past my bedtime, and I run upstairs. I was in the family room. We had a split level house. So I had to run up one flight of stairs and another flight of stairs. And I went to my mom's room. She always was in bed by 9 o'clock, and I'm begging her, 6-year-old Bobby, Mom, please, you have to let me stay and watch this movie. I have to stay up and watch this movie. And my mom says, because she's heard this before, and she's like, oh, what's it called? And I said, it's called Planet of the Apes. Now, I didn't know what that meant. I'd never heard that phrase before. I was like 6. What do I know? I just know that there was an astronaut talking into a recorder doing a ship's log, which I already understood from Star Trek. That's all I knew, and it crashed in the Forbidden Zone. No idea what's going on. And then, they walk through the Forbidden Zone, they go swimming, and they get their clothes stolen, and then they finally find where the trees are, where the crops are, and they're eating the humans' loincloths. And I'm like, what? It was weird because I remember as a kid thinking, what's going on? Because it was in a spaceship, and now there's people like cave people. Like, what's happening? I think, like, even though I already loved Star Wars and I already loved War of the Worlds, I'd seen War of the Worlds, so I love War of the Worlds. But I think I fell in love with movies the moment the apes arrive. And if you remember the original Planet of the Apes movies, well, the original movie, you don't see the apes right away. You see they're like sticks, and you don't know what's going on. There's foliage going up, and then everyone starts to scatter. And there's this moment when the first ape is revealed. And I don't know if it's like General Ursus or something, but it's an ape on horseback, and there's a snap zoom. And you see the horse rears up, and the camera goes it zooms right into the ape, and you hear Goldsmith's score going. I lost my shit. I was like, this. I can't. I'm getting chills thinking about it right now. Remember this. This was the moment where I fell in love. I mean, I fell in love with movies when the priest got fried in War of the Worlds, but this was something I hadn't seen before, and it was like it blew my mind. Like apes in military uniforms going after cavemen people with an astronaut in a spaceship that had crashed into Lake Powell. I didn't get what any of it meant, and to be honest, I bet you, I don't remember whether this is true, I bet you I didn't make it through all the movie. I bet I fell asleep. Because, to be honest, the first Planet of the Apes movie gets a little talky. But I remember I did see it up to, take your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape. Another great musical crescendo moment. And I'm like, I couldn't stop talking about it. And yeah, so anyway, that's a long story. Is anybody still watching this stream? I don't know. But yes, so anyway, so I got to go with Planet of the Apes. To answer your question, Planet of the Apes, the original. But I liked Beneath. I liked all 5 original Planet of the Apes movies. Planet of the Apes, Beneath Planet of the Apes, Escape from the Planet of the Apes, Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. And when they put out the box set on Blu-ray, it's the R-rated version of Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, which I actually had on Japanese Laserdisc. And it was great to get it on Blu-ray because I do think that's a far superior version, especially the final speech at the end. And, of course, Battle for the Planet of the Apes, which isn't very good, but I like it anyway. So there you go. Jason sent in a tip. I recently picked up Death of Superman, the graphic novel paperback set. I really like these reissues, as the glossy paper and higher quality printing make them look like high definition compared to the original releases. Been staring at your Superman Crisis set. Oh, dude. This Superman Crisis set is dope. Yeah, I really love it. Again, I forgot I even ordered this. This is one of those things where you kind of wish you didn't get it because, you're wondering, perhaps I could have used that money better elsewhere. It was like, because I ordered it like a year and a half ago or something when it was first announced, but this set is really cool. I mean, it's got all these volumes in it. I mean, how cool is that? So cool. Anyway, yeah, I love it. It's got like 15 different hardcovers, and it's got stuff that hadn't been published in hardcover before. I love the DC Universe, and I love Crisis. What it has that I really love, I have the paperbacks, the flimsy paperbacks, but it's got all of the JLA and JSA, like the Gardner Fox stories from the 60s where they would team up against Earth S, or not Earth S. That's the Shazam world. Earth 3 with the Crime Syndicate of America, which I loved as a kid. So good. Sorry, I probably shouldn't have told that Planet of the Apes episode. Maybe you're all still here. I don't know. This one comes from Curtis Joseph, letter. Happy New Year, Rob. It's great to know that you're a longtime connoisseur of horror films. Do you remember the horror flick Saturday the 14th? Come on, man. I wouldn't exactly call Saturday the 14th a horror flick. Starring Richard Benjamin and Paula Prentice? I do, actually. This slapstick feature had my 7-year-old self laughing so hard to tears on the living room floor back in 1981. The film was purely bad, but certainly damn good to watch for a Friday evening full of great laughs and quirky life lessons that bestowed upon graciously to the very young lad I was so long ago. On another note, in my own life of films, I've enclosed 2 shorts that I took part in and had lead roles. They were quite popular in their time. One was called Van Gogh, Hobo with a Shotgun Fake Trailer Contest Winner. Dude, I've seen this. And 2, Charlie Bit My Finger. In Van Gogh, I'm the bat. First of all, I'm going to put a link to this letter in the live chat because it goes to the Burnettwork website, and you can see there's links to the trailers on this website letter, and I love that. By the way, again, I have the capability of playing videos, so if you want to send me videos directly, and if you go to the Burnettwork.net website, if you want to send me greeting videos, if you want to send me questions, or instead of writing a letter, you actually show yourself, and you want to send me a video, I'll play your video on the show. I'll play it in the live stream. By the way, what I need, whether it's MP4s or I prefer movie files, but MP4s are fine too. But I love that. So anyway, In Van Gogh, I'm the badass cop who loves to cuss at potential suspects. The short is included on the DVD for Hobo with a Shotgun. And lastly, Charlie Bit My Finger, the horror. I was the lead protagonist, fending off the fantastic undead with a rifle, while at the same time helping Charlie to temporary safety. Though these are a couple of roles I got in quick succession. Being I got cast in Charlie Bit My Finger, the horror, right after completing Van Gogh, I loved both roles and relished the enhanced film professionalism I gained back then and maintained to this day. So, Rob, I hope you enjoy my couple of works, and may they have verisimilitude in them both. Kind regards, Curtis. Well, Curtis, thank you, and I encourage everybody to follow that link on the live chat and watch both of these. I know I'm going to do that. That's great. I love hearing about what people are doing, what you've done in the past, what you're doing in the future. Please share your work. As everyone knows, on the Burnettwork.net website, we have the Imagination Connoisseur Gallery where you can put your artwork or whatever you want up there to show. We have the 3-word movie reviews that you can submit. I love those. People review movies in 3 words. And if there isn't already your movie that you want to review up there, send in a movie we don't have up there and start your own page, which is great. So as many people know, this comes from Stephen Goggin, and this is his review of Apocalypse Now, Final Cut, which, it's fun to have more things that I can just, draw from. But yes, so I want to know what he thinks about Apocalypse Now. What does he think? What does Stephen think? And you're going to find out. Let's find out together. Greetings, Rob, and listeners of the Post-Geek Singularity community. I have just watched Apocalypse Now on 4K. I watched a few months back on standard DVD, and the difference is out of this world. The standard DVD was, I felt, grainy. The 4K is the final cut version, and I felt this was a much, much better movie than the standard version. I feel Francis Ford Coppola was channeling Caravaggio for this film. The art direction in this movie was a tour de force, and in some way, it's funny, whenever I hear the word Caravaggio, I always think of Willem Dafoe's character in The English Patient, not The Artist. There you go. I feel the art direction for this movie was a tour de force, and in some way it reminded me of the art direction in Kubrick's Barry Lyndon, and maybe both Coppola and Kubrick were being influenced by classical art for both movies. I think it's probably a good bet. A question: who was the art director, and how did they get the Caravaggio vibe into the story? As always, live long and prosper, Stephen Goggin, the Irishman in Somerset. Well, that's actually a very good question, Stephen. Again, I think the look of a film is a combination of a number of people. You have the director, of course. You have your Vittorio Storaro, who was the cinematographer, and then you have the the production designer. I think the production designer was Dean Tavaloris. Let me see. Who is a longtime collaborator of it was Dean Tavaloris. So it was a combination of them, and I think part of the decision is beforehand they have to decide, like, what is the color palette of this movie? What is the lighting going to look like? Are you going to rely on natural lighting? Are you going to stylize the lighting, like when they're at the Dolong Bridge with the lights and the flares and everything, the music? I mean, there is a definite vibe happening there, and all of this is pre-thought out. But I think, and of course, Storaro's photography, I think one of the things about Apocalypse Now is it has, to my mind, some peak verisimilitude, but it's also one of the most highly stylized movies that I've ever seen. And it works really, really well together. I don't know to answer your question. I'm just saying it's a combination of what everybody wants, and they usually decide beforehand, what is it we're trying to achieve? What is it we're going for? And they do that thing. And I think what Francis Coppola wanted to do in the case of this movie is make sure it feels totally real. You could not make this movie today. nobody would let you make this movie today, first of all, but they would always want you to use CGI. You would enhance it. It would never. One of the great things about Apocalypse Now is it really is one of the last truly great Hollywood epic films that is pretty much all in camera. As a matter of fact, I don't even know if there's a visual effect shot in the film at all. There might be some kind of enhancement, but for the most part, what you're seeing was done live, and that's what gives it its immediacy, its visceralness. Yeah, man, there's some. I can't talk about this movie. That disc is so good. Alexander Wilson is here. Alexander Wilson says, I tried to get my lady to watch Under the Skin, but she was like, what the fuck are we watching? She doesn't like a lot I like, and it makes me sad. But then I think genre or sex. I love genre, but I love sex more. And in that movie, you got both. And you get Scarlett Johansson fearless nude scene in that, which was surprising. I mean, she was committed. Under the Skin is a really interesting film. You know, I will say this. Under the Skin I think it helps if you grew up watching, like I talk about how much I love Antonioni or Tarkovsky, things like that. It is a movie that's almost pure cinema. And for the first, I would say, half of the movie, you don't know what's going on. You know, you really don't know what's happening. And if you haven't read the book, you really don't know, because it's pure cinema. You're basically, you're this voyeuristic observer, and you're wondering what's happening here. But it pays off. And I think it's one of the finest science fiction movies, definitely of the last decade. And, you know, Jamie Cruz says, why don't those types listen to peeps like you? Well, I would assume you mean people in Hollywood. Here's the thing. You have to earn your way into Hollywood. And the only way that you ever have respect is through, I hate to say it, either tremendous artistic or tremendous monetary success. Now, I've been working my whole career on the fringes of Hollywood. I mean, even independent cinema, you think indie cinema, you think Pulp Fiction and Sex, Lies, and Videotape. I certainly haven't even gotten to that level. And that's, you know, that's the problem. So, and now there's so many voices, there's so many people on the internet spouting off their opinion. I mean, the one thing that I have going for me is I am somebody that's continuing to make movies. And, you know, every time I work on something, I hope, okay, I hope Tango Shalom, look, my thoughts for Tango Shalom is I hope we sell it to a streaming service, because I wouldn't put it out theatrically. I think it's a wonderful movie. It's just in this day and age, when a movie like Booksmart doesn't find an audience at the theater, a movie that I thought was wonderful, how is a movie that has character actors from New York supposed to compete, even though I think it's a wonderful movie? But that's the reason. You have to be in a position where people respect what you do, and usually that's either through tremendous artistic or monetary success. Otherwise, it's all a crapshoot, because, as William Goldman famously said about Hollywood, nobody knows anything. Truer words were never spoken. Dallas Lemons sent, and Dallas is following up with his letter. Thanks for the insight. Keanu for Revan in 2022. Darth, is it Revan? Is it Revan or Revan? I would say, I just said Revan, but I would say Darth Revan. That's, I guess, what I would say. That would actually be pretty cool. I'd love to see Keanu Reeves wielding a dark saber, or wielding any kind of a lightsaber. Wrecking Shop. Dave Atkins says, loved the promo stuff for Prometheus, the TED conference with Peter Whalen speaking, David advertisements, etc. What Dave Atkins is referring to, before Prometheus came out, they made these promo movies, like these short films that were awesome. They were awesome. I thought they would have been great in the movie. And one of them was Peter Whalen of Whalen-Yutani, for all of you Alien fans out there. What a great... They were awesome. Those were viral social media marketing that also enhanced your enjoyment of the film. I love those things. I love that stuff. I want to see more of that. I mean, it's expensive to do, and to do it correctly, but it's something that I dig it, man. I am with you. I think that stuff was really, really good. I think I have another letter I wanted to read today. And let me find out. Now, this is interesting. I was talking about Watchmen, the Watchmen TV series, and what I thought about it yesterday. I was ranting and raving about it. This one comes from Nick Gadman. Hi, Rob. I'm proud to say I've been a big fan of yours for some years now, starting with the Collider days. What a fitting last letter to read. The John Campea Show, and I'm currently making my way through the thoroughly entertaining Inglorious Treksperts podcast. Oh, wait, I already read this yesterday. This is what sent you, Nick, I read this, and you sent me off on I thought this was a different letter, so I apologize. But that was a great letter, and you did send me off on a rant, which I appreciated. So thank you for that. So, ladies and gentlemen, that brings me to an end of Robservations, episode number 307. I want to thank all of you Imagination Connoissuers, all of you members of the Post-Geek Singularity community, for tuning in for another great show. Thank you for sending letters. If you want to send letters or videos or anything, please do so at the Burnettwork.net website, because it is the Burnettwork.net website that brings me all of that great material that you give to me. And heck, we wouldn't have such a great show otherwise. It's been, I feel like there's a lot of new people here. I want to thank everybody for subscribing and liking these chats. I think it's we're only getting bigger and better. But what's more interesting is I'm really liking the added perspective that people are sending in via their letters. I like hearing from you all. And again, now that I have the ability to play videos within the stream, I do want, first, I like using that capability, but I can now play videos from you guys. So especially everyone there's people here from around the world. I know like Tim lives in Australia, and I know that like Joseph and Vesna live over in the Balkans. Vesna lives in Sarajevo. She sent in a video, and it's great to hear from you. So we have a link on the website where you can send videos. And I assume that if you're going to send me a video, first of all, keep it clean. If it's something that's not clean, please flag it first, so I know not to play it on. I will watch the videos. But yeah, it's great. We're building a cool community here, and I think now that I can technologically add to what's going on, it's great. And by the way, yesterday, part of what I was talking about was the Criterion Channel. This is what you couldn't hear me saying, but I was saying that the Criterion Channel this month in January has an incredible retrospective of 70s science fiction films. And it's they've done a wonderful job curating it. And some of my favorite, obviously, Rollerball, Logan's Runner, part of that, John Carpenter's first feature film that started out as a student film. Dark Star is part of that. But there's more obscure titles like Oliver Reed and ZPG, Zero Population Growth. You don't get to see that a lot. I mean, it doesn't come out. Yul Brynner and The Ultimate Warrior. Things like The Omega Man, THX 1138. It's one of the best. Like, if I was going to a science fiction film festival, I don't know if Silent Running is in there, but Silent Running might be the only. Maybe it is in there. I don't know. But it's. I would have probably added Silent Running and Colossus: The Forbidden Project, but whatever. It's a really comprehensive list, and I think it's terrific. And to show you how terrific, here's a trailer for it.
Radiation rate is 5 point.
1138, retract.
Tell him. You gotta tell him.
Ladies and gentlemen, today is an historic moment.
Friday.
But enough of words. Actions speak louder than action now.
Cured, all right.
Wow. I mean, that lineup is unbelievable. And I really, really throw it out to Criterion. I feel that Criterion, I'm so glad they started the Criterion channel, and I do understand how they're probably focusing more on their their channel than their physical media releases because they see the writing on the wall too. But this is an incredible lineup, and there's just a wide variety of these are all pre-Star Wars movies, and they really show, they'll give you, if you haven't delved into 70s science fiction, I mean, part of this is even Cronenberg's first theatrical feature, Shivers, or as we got it in the United States, They Came From Within. I mean, this is just a great overview, really comprehensive overview of 70s sci-fi. I mean, I'll tell you something. ZPG is a movie not many people know, but it's sort of this Orwellian nightmare where people can't have kids. They're not allowed to have kids. It's really interesting. And it was funny. I'd seen it once a long time ago, but I recently picked up the Blu-ray from Warner Archive. And it's great. It's great that people will get access to these movies. And I hope, for those of you who haven't really delved into 70s sci-fi, give it a chance. I mean, I understand the film stocks, the colors, you're going to tell that they're old and they look like they were made in the 70s and all that, but there's so many interesting ideas here, and the storylines are really, they're all over the place. Actually, I think, to be honest, Mad Max is part of this, and that came out after Star Wars. Mad Max is 78, I believe. So there are post-Star Wars films, but really how science fiction looked in the 70s and how Star Wars changed it forever. It's a really great comprehensive look. So I recommend everybody check that out. And it's on the Criterion Channel. I mean, sure, you can get these movies elsewhere as well, but it's really cool that they're curating this. And I was very surprised at just how many films and the great variety they have. So anyway, that brings me to the end of this chat, the end of Robservations number 307. Thank you all for being here, and I really appreciate. I want to give it up to my moderators, the Honorable Mayor Mike Bodden, the great Greg Smith, who can build a house with his own hands, Detective Jim, who used to hunt down criminals of all walks of life and bring them to justice, and now he's here bringing people to justice in the chats, but I thank him for being here. I want to thank my newest moderators, Louis Yu, who I don't know. He was in Pasadena. He was in my neck of the woods yesterday. I don't know if him and his family ever made it up to Pasadena High School to see the Rose Parades, to check a Rose Parade floats, to check them out. And then, of course, Jordy Lyons, who is my latest and newest moderator. I want to thank them for making this a great place to be. I want to thank all of you Imagination Connoissuers for joining me on Robservations, the show about something. Thank you for everybody who supports the channel. Please visit the website at theburnettwork.net, and you can go to TeePublic. You can get. I just ordered my Robservatory hoodie. I don't get it free. I had to order it myself. It's pretty cool. My friend Bill Young was my executive at Warner Brothers. Bill Hunt of the Digital Bits, he designed it for me and sent me that design. There's two different ones. I like the one with the Blu-ray on it. I think it's pretty cool. But check that out. And once again, thanks. And remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I say, have a better day.